I had never really been a family person. I'd spent most of my life with my family, and during that time, all I could think about was leaving. Don't get me wrong, my family wasn't really bad or anything like that. I just constantly felt smothered anytime I was with them. So when it was finally time for me to leave for college, I left and never looked back. I ignored their constant calls and texts. I always made an excuse not to come for the reoccurring family gatherings, and I didn't even send them gifts or messages during their birthdays or holidays. Now, as I said, I didn't do this out of spite. I just wanted to keep my distance from them. And while I didn't know this at the time, it was a decision I would come to regret dearly. If I'm remembering correctly, it happened on the 30th of November, 2015. The Christmas holiday was coming up, and as usual, I made excuses not to come home for the holidays. My mom spent an hour trying to convince me on the phone, and I remember telling her that I had to work and I wouldn't be able to come home. Now, I worked at a nearby joint of the popular Denny's restaurant. Most of my coworkers had gone home for Christmas, and it was just a few of us left. I remember my manager being shocked when I told him I was going to work throughout the holidays, even on Christmas. He asked if I was sure about that, and I told him that it was fine. After my conversation with the manager had ended, I quickly got back to work. I was taking the night shift that night, so it was just me and my coworker Jill. Jill lived in the area, so she normally worked the night shifts with me. It was a very slow night, and I knew it was because of the holidays. With no customers around and not much going on, Jill and I just talked to each other. During our conversation, I remember her asking me,
"Why didn't you go home for the holidays, Todd?"
So I responded with,
"Well, I weighed my options, and it was either going home and spending time with some overbearing people or making a couple of bucks."
She laughed before responding with,
"Overbearing? Your family is really that bad, huh?"
I then told her,
To be honest, they aren't that bad, but sometimes they just get a little too much for me to handle. Besides, there's no other place I'd rather be.
I was about to say something else when a strange couple walked into the restaurant. The man was wearing a black shirt with three-quarter denim shorts, and he was holding a green bag in his right hand. His wife, or at least the woman I thought was his wife, was wearing a black and white shirt with black shorts. We immediately stopped our conversation to attend them, as I looked at the man and said,
"Welcome to Denny, sir. How can I help you?"
The strange man totally ignored me as he started to make his way behind the counter. Confused, I said,
"What are you doing, sir? You're not allowed back here."
But before I could do anything, I felt a gun pressed against my skin. I was about to scream when the man said,
"Don't you dare make a sound."
Jill soon arrived at the scene, and she screamed when she realized what was going on. The man then looked at her with cold eyes as he said,
"I'm going to paint your floor red with his insides if you don't stop screaming."
His menacing threat worked instantly as Jill stopped screaming. He then told her,
"Now, I'm going to take your friend here to the back of the restaurant and keep him hostage. And if you want to see him again, all you have to do is take out all the money in your cash register and give it to my partner here."
When he was done speaking, I was then ushered to the back of the restaurant. I remember being so scared that it was hard to breathe. I felt myself getting an anxiety attack, but I tried my best to keep it under control. I could tell Jill was also panicking, but she did everything they asked her as she started to clear the cash register. My eyes started to dart around now as I checked to see if there was anyone nearby that could help us. My assailant noticed me doing this, so he said,
"I don't think you've ever been shot before, because if you had, you'd think twice about doing anything stupid. I don't need to tell you that anything you do or whatever it is you're thinking of doing won't work. Don't be a hero, kid, because the heroes always die in the end. I really don't give a crap about your pathetic life, and I'd kill you without a second thought."
His words pierced through my soul, and it didn't take long before I smelled urine. I had peed myself, and my assailant, who had noticed this, started to laugh. The cash register was empty now, as Jill had given the woman all the money. The man then ordered her to go hide in the back of the restaurant before saying,
"You better do as I say, or I won't let your friend go."
Jill didn't complain as she did exactly what he asked. I was still crippled with fear, but I managed to stutter the words,
"We've done what you wanted, so please, can I go now?"
The man, who was shocked that I was able to speak, looked at me and said,
"I see you found some courage, but it's too late for that now, and I'm afraid we won't be able to let you go. We aren't done using you yet.
When he was done talking, the woman who was working with the man quickly walked out of the restaurant. The man then ushered me towards the door, and with my hands raised in the air, I walked out of the restaurant. When I was outside, he brought out his gun again and told me to face the wall. I did what he asked me to do, as I held on to some hope that I'd come out of this alive. The man then whispered the words,
"Now, I want you to close your eyes and count to 10. Do as I say, and hopefully, at the end of that countdown, you won't wake up in hell."
I started to count, and my heartbeat increased with every number I said. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life, and numerous thoughts began to fly through my head. I cursed myself for not taking the holiday break to spend time with my family, as I knew I wouldn't have been in this situation if I did that. I also knew that if this crazy man shot me here, no one would care, as I had constantly shunned the only people who would have cared. I then felt nothing but immense fear and regret as I prayed to come out of this situation alive. When I was done counting, I waited for something to happen, but all I heard was silence. It took a lot of courage to do it, but when I finally opened my eyes, they were gone. After the incident, the police were immediately called and we were asked to give our statements. We told them everything that happened and the hidden surveillance cameras were checked. The footage corroborated our stories and a manhunt was set up to find the thieves. He was trying to hide it, but our manager was more worried about the money that was stolen than the well-being of his employees. The news of the small case soon spread around town, and it didn't take long before my family heard about it. They all came to visit me the next week, and I could tell how worried they were. That incident became a real eye-opener for me, as I realized that I had no one that really cared about me apart from them, and no matter how overwhelming or overbearing they got sometimes, they were still my family. So I made a pact with myself to always try harder to get closer to them, and ever since that day, I never missed a family Christmas again.
I used to enjoy my work at Denny's. I would wake up by 8 and get to work by 9, serve customers and leave work by 4:30, but everything changed when the boss introduced the 24 hours policy. Workers would have to work on shifts. Some workers would work in the morning, everyone would work in the afternoon, and some would stay behind at night till the next morning. Everyone disagreed with the boss's decision at first, but after he offered to increase our salaries, we yielded to his offers. Many of us didn't have options. Things were hard enough, and we couldn't risk being jobless for any period. A duty roster was introduced, and everyone knew when they would be working during the 24 hours that our Denny's branch operated. It was a Friday afternoon, and my coworker and friend John called me to the back of the restaurant to inform me about his mother's illness and how he planned to visit her the next day. She stayed very far away, so he would have to spend at least a night at his parents' house. He asked me if I could cover for him and work his shift in his stead. He had asked the boss for permission to leave, but the boss refused to permit him to leave for even an hour. I thought about it for some seconds, but I yielded to his request when he offered to cover for me whenever I needed help too. I agreed and told him not to worry. We went back into the restaurant. A few hours later, John told me he was leaving and exited the restaurant. It was 4 o'clock and the day shift was finally over. Those who worked the day shift with me were preparing to leave, and those who would work the night shift, I checked the roster to see when John would be getting a break. It was then I realized that John was supposed to be working during the midnight to dawn shift. I panicked for a minute, but gathered myself and decided to go home and come back to work the midnight shift. A promise is a promise, I thought to myself. I went back home, did the needful stuffs, and came back to work to cover for John. I arrived at 11:30 and was ready to work as soon as I got to the restaurant and reached for the door. A gang of people came, pushed me to the side, and walked into the restaurant. They were all dressed in similar black t-shirts with a white design on the shirt. The design looked like an anchor. I walked in after them and finally took a good look at them. There were 5 men and a woman. They all had tattoos and their faces looked scary too. The lady in their midst was wearing very ridiculous-looking makeup and was chewing gum very loudly. One of the men had his hand around her neck, and they would smooch each other every minute. You could tell they were in a gang of some sort. I kept staring at them as I walked towards the kitchen. I took my uniform and put it on and went on to take orders. There were only 3 people in the restaurant, apart from the gang of people that sat in the booth by the window at the extreme end of the left side of the restaurant, very close to the door. The other people were already attended to, and I didn't want to be the one to take orders from the scary-looking people, but I didn't have any other choice. I went ahead and took their orders. "I'm here to take your orders. What would you like?" I asked with a shaky tone. They all burst into laughter, and I wondered what was wrong. They started to mimic the way I asked the question. "Looks like Server Boy over here is scared of us," said the scariest looking of them all. He was the one who had his hand around the lady amidst them. You could tell that he was the leader, and they all burst into laughter again. I felt humiliated and asked again, this time more courageously, "Can I take your orders?" They stopped laughing and looked at me. Their glares sent shivers down my spine, and I took a step back. It felt like they wanted to attack me. The leader looked at me and said, "Don't worry, you'll take our orders soon." I went back to the kitchen to assist my coworkers. 30 minutes had passed, and the gang refused to order anything. Nobody was willing to go and ask again. We were scared of them. An hour passed, and many of the customers had left, even those that came in after the gang. A few moments later, every customer apart from the gang had left. Suddenly, one of the gang members stood and went outside. He looked around suspiciously, like he was about to do something really bad. He came back in with a canvas messenger bag, and my coworkers and I looked at each other and wondered what they were up to. "What do you think is in the bag?" I asked Layla, who was beside me. We were both behind the counter. "Honestly, I don't want to know," she answered. The gang member placed the bag on the table, and immediately the entire gang got up. The leader opened the bag, and instantaneously they all brought out guns from the bag. Everyone panicked and bent to the floor. They took the guns and walked over to the counter. Some of them went to the door to check out for the cops. "Hey, Server Boy," the gang leader called to me. "I'm ready to order now." He pointed the gun at me. He told me to get up and passed me the empty canvas bag and told me to fill it with all the money from the cash register. I began to shake as I stood up and reached for the cash register. I started to fill in the bag with the money. As if that wasn't enough, he commanded everyone take off every item that they had on them, valuable or not. I didn't have anything important on me, just a broken wristwatch. I filled in the bag with all the money, and the gang leader pointed his gun directly at my head. I froze up at that moment. The blood-curdling feeling of the gun against my head made me weak. All I could think of was if he was going to pull the trigger or not. But he used his gun to push my head slightly and told me to take the bag around and collect the items from my coworkers. I collected the bag from him shakily and moved away from the counter to collect everything they had taken off. I went around collecting items from the others, and when I was done, I placed the bag in front of the leader. He looked at everyone and pointed his gun to Layla. "I said everything," directing his focus to the necklace on her neck. "No, please, no," Layla begged. The leader grabbed the necklace from her neck and tried to yank it off, but Layla fought back and tried to stop him from taking it. It meant a lot to her. She had told everyone about how her grandmother who raised her gave her the necklace. It was the only belonging of her grandmother that she had left. The leader would not have it, and he shot Layla multiple times until she lay flat on the floor right beside me. All I could do was stare at her as she bled out and lost consciousness. Everyone began to scream and cry after witnessing the shooting. "You weren't supposed to shoot anyone," the lady in the gang said furiously to the leader. "You," he pointed the gun at me again. "Take the necklace off and put it in the bag," he said. I crawled hurriedly in fear to Layla's dead body and removed the necklace from her neck. Tears rolled down my face as I took the necklace off and placed it in the bag for the gang leader. He raised his gun at me and looked at me with a mortifying glare like he was about to shoot me. Suddenly, we heard sirens, police sirens. A police car was headed in the direction of the restaurant. One of the gang members who was by the door on the lookout for the cops signaled the leader, and he quickly grabbed the bag, passed it to the lady, and they all left. The police came in about a minute after they had left. We informed them about the robbery and shooting that took place, and they chased after the gang. The gang members were eventually caught. After that night, I quit my job at Denny's. It was better to remain jobless than lose my life. I still have nightmares about the robbery and Layla's dead body. I wish I had refused John's offer on that sad day.